You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Supplemental. Aaron Waltke.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Norman Lau, and just like our flagship Mission Log podcast, each week here on Mission Log Prodigy, we discuss every single episode of this animated series, discover what makes each of them special, and see if there are any morals, meanings, or messages that we have learned. Now, my dearest Ashley V. Robinson was unable to join me for this very special supplemental episode, but I'm sure that her secret assignment to find Chakotay for Janeway in the Delta Quadrant is highly classified, so we can't get into that right now. Just a reminder, this show is produced for both YouTube and as a regular podcast, so be sure to engage the like button and subscribe button to Mission Log Prodigy here on the Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel. And please make sure to listen to our podcasts at podcasts.roddenberry.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all the podcasts you know where to go for your podcasts. You can also follow Mission Log on Twitter at ML_Prodigy to keep up with all of our latest news and updates. That is a long way of saying I am so excited. I am so excited to bring on our guest for this supplemental episode. Welcome, Aaron Waltke. Welcome to Mission Log Prodigy.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's, long-time listener, first-time caller.
I just wanted to let all of the listeners know that Aaron and I have been doing this wonderful social media Twitter dance where he follows, I follow all of his tweets and I, reply to some of them. He graciously responds and maybe even gives me a smiley emoji on some of mine. But I think that I think it's fair to say that you are well plugged into the social media space and promote Prodigy, at the most passionate level. But for all of our listeners who are either seeing you for the first time or meeting you for the first time here, I'd love for you just to be able to introduce yourself and kind of let them understand like where you are in your career. How did Star Trek Prodigy bring you here? I know Troll Hunters will probably come up maybe once or twice. And
sure.
How dare you do this to me? With ARG, I can't deal with it, dude.
Well, just keep watching.
All right.
My name's Aaron Waltke. I'm a screenwriter and executive producer. I'm currently head writer and co-executive producer of Star Trek Prodigy, which is why I promote the show, even though I probably would anyway, because I enjoy Star Trek so much. My relationship with the show, I've been there from pretty much the beginning. I've known the Hagemans for almost a decade now. And as you alluded to, we first worked on a show called Troll Hunters together, which is from Guillermo del Toro. It was the most, to date, I think that was the most ambitious show that either of us or any of us had worked on, because obviously Guillermo del Toro has a very high standard and has boundless creativity, and he encouraged us to do the same thing. So we, worked together on that, and that was 52 episodes, which expanded into a trilogy of shows, including Three Below and then Wizards, Tales of Arcadia, which I was brought back to co-showrun and be a head writer on as well. And while I was working on that show, the Hagemans were co-writing the feature film Rise of the Titans that was going to cap off the trilogy. So they actually had an office right next to mine at DreamWorks while we were wrapping up working on Wizards. And I remember this would have been, the fall or winter of maybe 2018, something like that. I remember them coming in and saying, "Hey, we just had this meeting with Secret Hideout. They seem very interested in doing sort of like a young adult Star Trek show. You like Star Trek, yes?" I was like, "Yes, I do." If you watch even Tales of Arcadia, a significant portion of a lot of the mythos there was subtly or not so subtly inspired by Star Trek, like when the trolls call them humans and Babura as the name of Jim's mom, Barbara. And, trollish culture was in some ways based on Klingon culture, so I was very much tuned into that world, and the Hagemans knew that. And they said, hey, would you be interested in, well, first they were like, what do you think we were thinking about doing a show where some kids find a starship. And I was like, oh, maybe you should have this character be a hologram, so then they developed a pitch. And then while they were kind of figuring that stuff out, at least the way I heard it was like, this was winter of 2018, the head of Secret Hideout, Alex Kurtzman, was at a party or something with Brian Robbins at Nickelodeon, at the big CBS Viacom thing, and just happened to mention like, hey, we're thinking about doing a Star Trek show with the Troll Hunters guys. And then Brian Robin, being as supportive as he's always been, basically said, oh, you have a show. And so very rarely do you get that kind of top-down enthusiasm. So after that, the momentum moved very quickly. And, the Hagemans used to joke that I was sort of employee number one on it, because they basically came to me as like, because they knew Wizards was kind of ramping down, and so I was kind of in a position where I could kind of moonlight on both on the first season. So I was brought on to write and produce on the first season. And then, when the show officially got renewed for a second season, they said, hey, do you want to, now that Wizards is done, do you want to come and work on this full time, as our, head writer and co-executive producer? And I said, absolutely. So that's kind of the abridged version of how I got involved with Star Trek Prodigy. Being a lifelong fan, of Star Trek, I've said this elsewhere, but like this, I've written on a lot of shows now, and I've written a couple of movies in the past and stuff, but this is by far the most interesting experience, because I've been so immersed in the world of Star Trek for so long. I don't always have to think very hard about how the mechanics work and how the world building works. It's almost like more like breathing than it is actually having to write. Obviously when we add to the mythos, I have to think very carefully about, how things piece together and what story threads we're dangling from previous series like Voyager or Deep Space Nine or TNG from this era that we could kind of pull and tease out, as well as invent our own races and our own strange new worlds and civilizations, which I think is just as important as the canon, because that's right there in the mantra there. We have to boldly go where no one has gone before. So that's kind of been my journey, and I become sort of a de facto Trek expert on the show as well. And, everyone has given me a lot of sort of leeway as far as like trying to express my vision of what I think that, how to wrap up these 40 episodes could be and have it be a Trek universe, but also with our own stamp on it that both honors the legacy characters we're bringing in and the new characters who are the central focus. So, that's kind of been my role on the show and how I got involved. And it's been a wild ride so far.
So on the back, I love looking at people's background spaces, because this is the world that we lived in Zoom. You have something on the back on your whiteboard that says Star Trek Secrets. Nothing that we should be concerned with, right? Nothing that we should blank out.
I actually wrote that as a joke.
Okay.
because I knew people would be trying to read it.
Now, you were brought in the first season, and obviously we're only in the first 10 episodes of the first season, but in those first 10 episodes, you wrote, aside from executive producing, you wrote Kobayashi and Immoral Star Part 1, or part of the writing team of Immoral Star Part 1 and Part 2. There was something that and this was hoping that it would we would be able to get you on the show. Sure. There are questions that I asked both Dan and Kevin when they were on the show, and I wanted to ask you these exact same few questions at the very beginning. So I've done some math. I'm not very good at it, but this is pretty basic arithmetic, so I think I can make it at least at the ensign level of sweeping stuff. Maybe on the Protostar or on lower decks. Mm-hmm. It's been 10 episodes so far. Roughly around 220 minutes, or a little of maybe 3.5 hours of content that's been shown so far. Now, as I said before, you're very active on social media. You're very active in the Prodigy Twitter space and with the community. How have you received the feedback so far, and how are you feeling about the show at this point from the interaction that you've received and you've partaken in?
Gosh, it's been actually better than I was expecting, and I don't mean that in a denigrating way, but I just Star Trek fans, I think, invented the nitpick, right? Mm-hmm. So I was expecting it to be we're going to have to win them over, because historically, every new Star Trek has the first season where everybody's like, I don't know about this. Is this right? Is this what I want? But I've been kind of overwhelmed with the positivity around Prodigy. I think maybe it's just because, unlike some of those other shows, we knew going in, we had 20 and probably 40 episodes to play with. So we could be very meticulous from the get-go of constructing the show. So my interactions with fans have been pretty overwhelmingly positive, and even the people that do have questions or it's like, oh well, this episode doesn't even, the pilot doesn't have as much Starfleet as I like, then I'll see tweets from them a few episodes later,
and then they're wait for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh my god, this is so Star Trek, never mind.
Right.
And the episode I wrote, Kobayashi, which you mentioned before, in some ways was sort of like, if you were waiting for Star Trek stuff, like that was the fire hose version of that. Like, don't worry, we know what we're doing. Just hang tight. In that regard, I think I probably tipped the scales a little bit, towards too much Star Trek stuff, but people seem to really enjoy it. And we managed to find a way to justify that in the narrative of the show of like, what happens if you do expose these characters that don't know who these these amazing legacy characters are, to this sort of like, okay, you asked for it, you got it. You're now in the Star Trek scenario. And let's see how you stack up. You can't blame it on your crew anymore. You can't blame it on this, that, or whatever. It's just you and how you do as a Star Trek captain. Right. And of course he didn't do very well because he hasn't been to Starfleet Academy, and he hadn't yet totally embraced the ideals of Star Trek and what makes a good captain, and by osmosis a good crew. That was, I think what I've liked, even for the people that were skeptical on Twitter, is like once they watch the first 10 episodes, then they're like, okay, I get it now, which is to me the highest compliment, because I think there's always going to be people that have reservations, and that's totally fine, because that's the beauty of Star Trek. It contains multitudes. Every series is different in its own way. But the question is like, once you kind of get on its wavelength, what do you think of it? And I would say at this point, there are fans of every Star Trek series that's been released, which is pretty amazing, considering I lived through many of those releases. And if you had just gone off the season 1 reaction, you'd be like, "Ooh, I don't know if this is going to stick around as a show."
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
And now everybody loves them. So the fact that Prodigy has been so warmly received right off the bat, I think our Rotten Tomatoes score is just a little bit below Strange New Worlds right now as one of the top rated first seasons out there. It's been overwhelming, and I'm eternally grateful to the Star Trek fandom for that.
Well, I mean, we've obviously encountered a fairly long drought since February, I believe, 3rd this year. That was episode 10. That was Immortal Star Part 2, which has pretty much left us in this cliffhanger space of when Riker said fire at the end of Best of Both Worlds, Part 1. There's that long summer. And I don't know if you're able to tell us, or at least hint towards, when do you think that this long break is going to at least give us a schedule of what we can start planning on seeing Prodigy come back? Because we do have the rest of Strange New Worlds, which is about 7 more episodes, according to all the online information out there. That's the end of Strange New Worlds. But, from my research online, I haven't seen anything officially from either Secret Hideout or Paramount Plus or Nickelodeon saying when Prodigy is going to return in total for the final 10 episodes. Is there anything that you can speak about that?
Well, there's some I can and some I can't, and I'll explain why. And like I can say it is coming. All 10 episodes are coming later this year. Don't worry, like they're coming. As far as the specific date goes, we are still finishing them, first of all. As this show is a very complicated show to make. It's arguably, I don't think even Nickelodeon would dispute this is probably the most ambitious show that Nickelodeon has ever attempted to produce. And it's the first high-end CGI show that, CBS has tried to do since like the 90s Saturday morning. So like in that regard, there was a lot of things we had to figure out of how do we maintain this quality and this and that. So we didn't want to release the show until it was absolutely done, because, even though there is a little bit of waiting, this show will live forever. And we didn't want it to be like, we really took a dip in the visual quality, after episode 6 or whatever. And that's why there was a little bit of a gap over Christmas too, in addition to the scheduling stuff. And then the other thing too, that why I can't give a specific date yet is because, the scheduling stuff is in fact a whole way above my pay grade of like when they could do marketing pushes,
sure,
making sure that they don't advertise it too early. And then you lose that momentum going into the opening. So I'm not a marketing or publicity person. So I don't know the exact math. But all I can say is like, don't worry. You'll probably get a date soon. And it's not that far away. We're what, almost to June now. So yeah, it's coming relatively soon.
Yeah, I know the fans out there, they're probably, when they're watching this, you're like, you got to ask Aaron like right now, like when it's going to return, because again, the passion, the love for this show, we miss the characters so much. We miss, seeing our Rock Talk. We miss seeing our Dal arc when, we miss seeing, Murph, right? Because everyone loves Murph. I wanted to give you more of an opportunity, though, to dive into Kobayashi, because Kobayashi was the first episode that came back after the break, and that was only a 6-week break. But you're right, you did lean a little bit more into, say, the Easter eggs of the past, and especially with the voice acting. So one of the things I wanted to see if you could give us a little bit more background on, there were very specific moments and very specific legacy characters that you chose. And I would say you because you were the writer of this episode, but you and your team chose to help advise Dal through his, I don't know how many, 40-something attempts he did at the Kobayashi Maru.
He did at least 42 that we did numbers of, but I think it might have even been more than that.
Let's say for the in joke, 47, right? Because 47 is the in joke of Star Trek. Yeah. You had legacy characters and bringing back video clips and sound bites of Rene Auberjonois' Odo, and then you had Gates on there doing a line or two of original work for Crusher. But I do think that the one character that everyone really focused on, because he was the advisor to the captain for many fans, and that's Leonard Nimoy returning as Spock. Mm-hmm. However, there were so many different variations of Spock that were being used in the sound bites, from young Spock, we're talking young as in 1966 Leonard Nimoy, all the way to 2009, or I think even Into Darkness Leonard Nimoy. And I was wondering if the variations of his sound bites were specifically left the way they were to respect the legacy of Leonard Nimoy's career, or was it an issue with not being able to produce it in the way that you wanted it to be produced, so that all the sound bites sounded more continuous as, in terms of being too hot or too spiky, or too out of level? I was just wondering if you could share some insight on that.
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that element of the script was unbelievably difficult to produce, because originally we had said, we'll do some legacy voices and bring in some people. But then, we learned that, Uhura, for instance, she, Nichelle Nichols was obviously had fallen ill. And then we had started in the process of reaching out to to the voice of Odo when we found out how sick Rene was, and unfortunately he passed away. After we had written the part for him, and so we kind of hit a crossroads where we were like, well, we can't just pull him out now. We put him in there as to honor both because Odo is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek, and it felt wrong since we were already talking about doing it with Leonard Nimoy's performance, to not afford the same, for the other people that we wanted to honor, but couldn't for one reason or another. So it was this strange process where the people that we chose, they were all great. I think my first draft had way too many people on the bridge. I think my first draft had like 9 or 10 people, and the reason for that was because, when we were in the writer's room and we were kind of breaking this and I was taking the lead because it was my episode, we kind of paused. It was like, all right, but what's the best bridge crew really? If you can,
I needed to ask you that. I mean,
and we tried. Was
this your choice or was this a collaborative effort?
Well, ultimately it was my choice because I wrote and produced the episode, and they kind of just put it in my hands and said, go with God. We tried in the writer's room. We were like, okay, let's start with just like, okay, who are our favorite characters? Who are the best engineers? Who are the best this, that? And eventually, by the time we finished that list of everybody making very good cases, we looked at the board and we had written down every single Star Trek character who ever existed. and so we're like, oh, okay. And then we were like, okay, well, what if we just did our top, like by vote? And then we wound up like, okay, we now have 3 engineers on the bridge. Like, that's not going to work, so that was one challenge of like, and we realized very quickly, we cannot just say definitively, according to science, this is the best bridge crew. It's literally impossible because there's so many combinations where, oh, this character works really well with this character, or we love these 2 characters equally, but they occupy the same role. And so that was one challenge. We're like, all right, we have to be very deliberate in saying this is not the best bridge crew. It's just a great bridge crew. Right. And so that was one challenge. The other challenge.
I'm sorry, but this exercise has been done like in person at conventions, on social media, ad nauseum with every single generation of fans. I mean, we know this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's partially why on a meta level, I was like, this could actually work, because we didn't even start with the idea of like, oh, let's just put a bunch of Star Trek cameos in this. Like when we were breaking the episode, it was just we started from a point of Dal tries to take the Kobayashi Maru, unaware that you cannot win. And what does that mean for his character? In terms of his arc of this guy who is sort of a self-appointed captain, but needs a wake-up call to realize he has a lot to learn. And whatever defense mechanisms he's kind of thrown up of like, I know what I'm doing, we're going to get through this, doesn't work, outside of that sort of fight or flight lifestyle that he grew up with.
Right.
And learning to sort of expand his bubble of trust and empathy, and beyond what maybe he was comfortable with, when he was spending time on Tars Lamora, or, as sort of like this bilge rat assistant of Nandi. So it was, I think we realized there was a little bit, we talked a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that regard of like, there's a lot of kids out there that maybe didn't grow up in a federation like Utopia, that maybe didn't have those basic needs met of like food and shelter and, emotional support and stuff to allow them to be fully realized and self-actualized people. And Dal, in many ways, was kind of one of those characters that like had a certain level of defense mechanisms and arrested development that we realized we had to break down a little bit for him to be able to grow beyond that and become a great Starfleet cadet. And so that's where we started. And it was not until we got to like, well, what does the Kobayashi Maru program look like in the age of the holodeck? And we were like, wait a second. And we realized, first of all, the holodeck is well established that it can just call up and create, computer generated people of literally anyone in history. You know, like it just be like, hey, I want to play poker with Leonardo da Vinci and Einstein. Okay, like it's not hard for it to do at all.
Or do battle with Moriarty in and out of the holodeck. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was like a big part of it. It was like, wait, like what does the original one look like? And we kind of thought about that. It's like, how interesting is it that in the original creation of the Kobayashi Maru, it's not just like random other, Starfleet teacher's assistants. It's literally the bridge crew of the Enterprise. And it's like, so clearly that's part of it too, of like, it's your crew is the best and brightest available. And it's all on you as the captain. And we're like, if you apply that logic to holodeck logic, then that means you would ostensibly probably as the holodeck or as the Kobayashi Maru evolved, over 110 years, however long it was, then you would think that an element of, similar to a lot of the Star Trek video games that are out there where you can literally pick your own bridge crew. I think Timelines has a similar idea where you can just be like, okay, I want Khan as my first officer and I want, Uhura, or whatever. So we were like, wouldn't that be interesting if that was an element of like that sort of self-mod kind of part of like giving that illusion of control to further kind of, I guess, immerse the person who's taking this into thinking that they might actually have a shot if they pick the right crew.
Right. Kind of like having an all-star team and thinking that you're going to win like the only all-star team that does that would be like, the USA basketball team in the Olympics. Right. But
right. Exactly.
That's pretty much about it.
Yeah. And I think that would only deepen the lesson of like, because when you fail, then it really is truly on you. Right.
Right.
And so that when that element came out, that's when we were like, oh my gosh, we are animated. Like maybe we could get some of these legacy characters back and a number of them back in a way that it would have been difficult or outright impossible, if it was live action. Mm-hmm. And so we started thinking about that. And then we said, well, who's the best first officer? And that was like the one thing that everyone kind of agreed was like, well, it's Spock. Like there's nobody better than Spock. And then we started talking about like how interesting, like we have this sort of old meets new, the passing of the torch element of like, and how would we do Spock? Would we recast him, and then as we were kind of going through the scenario of like what those touch points would be for that character, we realized that a lot of them are things that Spock had already said to Kirk or others. And we were like, how special would it be to introduce like new and young audiences, especially who maybe hadn't seen, Nimoy's performance, but might get just a touch of that gravitas and that profundity in the art that he was doing. And, and canonically, there was already, I think there'd been holograms of Spock in TNG as well, in Unification 2. I think that was the whole. So we're like, well, there's already a Spock hologram out there somewhere. So if that's when we decided, like, why don't we just see if we can have Dal's interaction with these characters be, using their original performances and perhaps hopefully give you a sense of who those characters are and inspire audiences to want to go back and see those original performances or see more of like, Mom, who is that pointy-eared fellow? I want to know more about them. And then you could show him Galileo 7 or whatever.
As you know, one of the things that we do here as a signature part of our show is that we actually have like younger cadets call in, and we're talking about, I think our youngest caller that called in, obviously with his parents' permission, was 3 years old. 3 years old. And, they share their stories, and, young boys, young girls calling with their parents, sharing these special moments, like bridging literally like the Star Trek generations from parents to children. And one of the things that's really, really important to us when Ashley and I look at a show and review it, especially for Mission Log, because this is kind of like, this is our mantra on Mission Log, as we take a look at the morals and meanings and messages. Kobayashi, obviously, as episode 6, almost kind of set this trend of very specific morals, meanings, and messages that are themes towards a specific character. And here's the interesting thing. Ashley and I both have discussed that there's one character that we have not yet seen a very focused, specific show on, but seems to be both comedic and poignant at the same time when he needs to be, and that's Jankum Pog. So I'm wondering, like in the next the next episodes, 11 through 20, are we going to see a little bit more of Jankum Pog develop? Because there are specific lines that Jankum drops in episodes when he was looking at the ion storm, where he says that storm is represents what Jankum Pog feels. That's a very important line, and it may sound like a throwaway line, but there's more to him than I think that we've seen. And I was wondering if we are going to see a little bit more, because also Jason Mantzoukas, amazing voice talent, right?
Yeah. And the short answer is yes, you will see a little bit more of Jankum Pog. I think Jankum is going to be tested in some ways, as he kind of encounters, he's been sort of playing Starfleet. And as we've kind of hinted, they are going to be starting to encounter more of the real Starfleet in upcoming episodes. And, I think as a Tellarite who, maybe thinks he's all that as an engineer, but also has some insecurities, as you pointed out. I think you'll see how that kind of develops in upcoming episodes, as he's kind of sees sort of a Caliban's mirror of himself, reflected back of like how other people perceive him. So I can't really say more than that. That's not spoilers, but I think, you will, Jankum has some great moments, I think. But yeah, to get back to your prior question though, as far as the levels of and stuff of the Spock character and why we use that audio. The short answer is it was recorded 50 years ago,
right?
And it was on magnetic tape. I think back then nobody expected this to be a hit in the way that it was. Nobody thought to preserve this stuff in a way that was like, well, it was made at a time when like the first Doctor Who episodes were literally being taped over because they're like, nobody's going to watch this crap again, right. But now here we are 56 years later, and it's like, we're trying to recreate those performances. So our audio engineers actually did the absolute best they could, and there were actually a lot of lines we wanted to use, but then when we went back and found them, they were just too poor quality, or the poor boom mic operator back in 1966 just didn't quite catch the performance. There's people walking across this big empty soundstage, or picking up an instrument or something and rattling, or the actual audio edit in the original was just really rough and bad. And you don't notice it because it was made in the 60s, but when you have it taken out of context, it was hard. So yeah, in terms of like the choices of using all of the performances that we did that were across, his entire career, there was sort of like towards the end of it, as we kind of slowly pieced together, like, what is the narrative? What are the call and responses and the reactions, from our legacy characters and our new characters. There was a spot where, like, once I had honed down Spock's sort of final monologue to his essence, I started to realize that two things occurred to me. One, there wasn't really an easy way that I could make it so it all sounded like he was doing the same performance, next. And so I was like, well, it's a holodeck program, so it's not the worst thing in the world to remind audiences, like, hey, this is just a simulacrum. If you want the original, go back and watch it. It's amazing. So that was one thought. And the other thought was, I realized that this very likely, at least for the foreseeable future, may be the last appearance of Leonard Nimoy in Star Trek. So in that regard, I took it very seriously, and I said, and I started to see that there was sort of like a way, just by kind of happenstance, and then it was sort of shaped a little bit, that we got to see it in that last monologue, a little element of every part of his career up into his last performance. So if you actually break down where they came from, the first line is from TOS, and then the next line is from Wrath of Khan, the TOS movies. Then the next line is from Unification, his appearance on TNG, and then the final line is from the J.J. Abrams movies, where he says, "Live long and prosper." And believe it or not, that last line was very difficult to find the right delivery of, because first of all, you'd be surprised to learn he only says live long and prosper maybe like 8 or 9 times in all of Star Trek, which I was shocked to learn, because it's sort of like you assume, like, oh yeah, he definitely said beam me up, Scotty, and then you realize he
Right.
never actually said that.
Yeah, it's like the play it again, Sam thing. It's more in the pop culture vernacular
Right.
than it actually is or was spoken.
Yeah,
Right.
and I went through every single delivery of that line, and the gravitas of sort of a goodbye and good luck that I was looking for, I don't think it was quite there in some of those early performances, because when back in 1966 he was in his 30s, he was on top of the world, he would just kind of like toss it off like live long and prosper, like, and it wasn't until like the late movies, and then unfortunately he never said it in Unification. It was only his dad, Sarek, who said it. So then it wasn't until I found his performance in 2009 where I was like, wow, even if this sounds a little bit more aged and wise than the earlier performances, it definitely, there was something behind Nimoy's performance in that moment where he was in some ways saying goodbye to Star Trek, and I was like, gosh, I have to try that, because that was the artist's intent. And so that was kind of the thinking behind it. And, if I had my druthers, I would have brought Leonard Nimoy into the booth and would have had him record all of it. But given the extreme extenuating circumstances that we had, I chose to made a conscious choice to like remind people like it's just a holodeck program, but these are his words. I hope you remember them fondly.
And it was almost like a history lesson or a love letter, not just for the audience, but it was also like a history lesson for Dal himself to kind of like understand that this character has evolved throughout the course of X amount of decades, in Starfleet. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, Aaron, because you did allude to this a little bit early on when you said when the Hagemans approached you to bring you on the project, you said that maybe we can do a hologram of this particular character. I asked them something similar to this in their interview, but how important was the decision to bring Janeway on the show at the very beginning? And it sounds like it was coming from you. The influence for her character was coming from you to bring back, which begs one more question. The Delta Quadrant. Do you believe that Janeway and the Delta Quadrant was the way to open up so many other doorways for original storytelling?
Well, I will say it wasn't just me. It was sort of like a ping pong back and forth, because the Hagemans had the idea of kids trapped on a starship. And then I suggested, why don't you have sort of like, some sort of training figures, a figure that could kind of guide them into the world of Star Trek and make that a hologram. Because originally we were thinking like, well, there's the ship's computer, but that doesn't have very much personality. And then I was like, well, it could be an emergency training hologram. And then
Picardo would have been amazing too, right?
Well, yeah, Picardo is amazing for a number of reasons, but he has the emergency medical hologram down
right.
pat. So we don't want to alter that canon. Sure. So then that opened up the question of like, well, would this be a new character or would it be based on someone? And since obviously the Doctor was based on Dr. Zimmerman, we were like, it totally makes sense if there was sort of like an emergency training or command hologram or something. It would be somebody, with a lot of experience. And just from a meta perspective, if they're trapped in the Delta Quadrant, it really should be someone who has a lot of experience there. And so like, it wasn't like this was all within like a breath, right? Mm-hmm. Of us just saying like talking this out as a writer's room. And I think very quickly we realized, well, if this show has Picard, like I feel like there's only one logical choice of somebody who has experience in the Delta Quadrant, bringing misfit crews together in order to find a way to home. And that's, of course, Captain Janeway. So then the question, of course, was like, can we get Kate Mulgrew involved? Because, by all accounts, this was, a very important part of her life. Mm-hmm. And, it's not a small ask to say, should you come back and reprise this role? And so that was kind of how it evolved to that question, because it's like it was my idea to have a hologram character, and then I think I was definitely part of the discussion to make it Janeway, but the Hagemans were definitely, they loved the idea as soon as the room kind of arrived at that. Then the question was like, can we get her? And then there was like a tense negotiation period as we had to kind of present what we had and convince her that this wasn't just going to be like the little Kirk and Spock show, but was going to be very respectful of both her character and bring young people into the Star Trek universe in a way that fires their imaginations. And I think that element, once she understood that we were taking it that direction, she was on board, and we were like, all right, let's just start writing the show. The lawyers will figure out the contract stuff. We're just going to do it. And thankfully it works out, and everything was great. It couldn't have been anybody else, honestly. Like, I mean, it could have been, but come on, it's Catherine Janeway.
Well, it's almost as if that Kate has almost tuned a new element of her performance, like as she's addressing like all of these younger people in her crew, because as a good captain and as kind of like the maternal force of Voyager, she was always very good. Janeway is always very good at being able to talk with the right tone to the right person at the right time to get the right thing done. So Dal's going to be talked to a different way, then Gwen's going to be talked to a different way. Of course, then Rock Talk is going to be, because she's so innocent and so young. So I feel that we're actually seeing another gear of Janeway's performance, of Kate's performance. And I'm sorry, I just kind of jumped in because I also wanted to know if the Delta Quadrant was the tapestry that would afford everybody to be able to go out there and boldly go as writers and as creatives and just say, let's do something new.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of it too, because we're like, what's a space where we could have an alien race that we haven't seen before, and be in an area that we're not familiar with, so it could be in some ways a bit of a blank space that we could canvas on, but was near enough everything else that as we kind of expanded that palette, we could have those other influences creep in and become this part of this big tapestry. And very quickly we realized, like, oh, well, the Delta Quadrant is that sort of like unexplored frontier that has history of like, how do you get home? But as long as you don't send them 70,000 light years away, like Voyager is, if we were like, oh, what if we put it right near the border of the Beta Quadrant? So that is sort of like, it's remote enough that you have that blank canvas, but it's close enough that whenever you want some sort of Alpha or Beta Quadrant species to start to trickle in, especially after the events of Voyager, where they defeated the Borg, and you see in Picard and Discovery that those transwarp conduits are open and ripe for the taking, right, of like as a shortcut. Like, wouldn't it be interesting to start to see this sort of confluence of the four quadrants, and what does that mean sort of geopolitically, or it's in some ways it's a metaphor for our own state in the world right now, is like, whether they like it or not, we're all part of a global society that has to deal with each other. And, it's not just about whether, one country wants to invade another country. It affects everybody. And so we wanted to explore that sort of stuff of just like isolationism versus being open to new ideas and new people.
Oh, I definitely think that for all of the Prodigy fans that were watching the end of Picard season 2 and seeing what happened in the Delta Quadrant with the transwarp conduit, many of us took great attention to kind of speculating what does that really mean, because you did leave us with the new Dauntless, which was amazing, by the way, because I love like all of those designs. I love the Dauntless. I love the Prometheus, of which is pretty much kind of like a sister ship to the Protostar in the fuselage and the way that it's designed. So I think that if for anything, and I'm taking a huge leap of faith here to speak for the fans out there of Prodigy, we are waiting with the baitest of breaths for it to return, because we love it so much. I'm not ashamed to honestly say that I think at the end of every episode, I'm in tears in one way or another, because not only are the characters growing, but we're watching them grow. And there's almost a Saturday morning nostalgic connection where there was a time where we would watch these cartoons for entertainment, and then we would become older and realize that there were actually messages that taught us these specific lessons of life that we're actually reflecting on now. And as a 50-year-old male watching this show, I'm still reminded that, yes, Star Trek is still teaching us something new, and I think that's wonderful to see. And I think that that's fantastic for like the new audience to see. We have just about wrapped up our time here, Aaron. So I just wanted to see if there was one more opportunity to be able to say one or two things that you would like to say to the audience about what can they expect, and maybe leaves us with something that's a little delicious to chew on from a spoilerific point of view.
Okay, well, let me think about that for a second. Well, so first of all, yes, I'm glad that really does mean a lot. I think to hear that you find it so moving. I find it moving too, not from a narcissistic way, but just because I think a lot of these stories are sort of reflecting on the greater Star Trek universe, which means quite a bit to me. And the thought of passing some of that along to new and young audiences and say, this is what Star Trek really means to me, and having it sort of reflected back is such a unique experience and deeply and profoundly moving to me. There's no shame in shedding a tear or two. Whenever I watch down episodes 19 and 20, even if it's just like to check a shot, an animation shot or something, I find myself crying by the end of it, because you are really caring about these characters, but you also care about what they represent. And that's something that Kate Mulgrew has said repeatedly, which is like a theme of our show that she once reflected in all of it, which is that you're never too young and you're never too old to learn from the young. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that I think is very special to our show, and something I always try to keep at the forefront. The other thing I think I'd love to just kind of talk about in terms is we have 40 episodes to play with, right? And that is something that I think is, as I alluded to before, is somewhat unique to Star Trek. Because I think every other show has always been, well, all right, we'll put out one season and see how it does, right? Mm-hmm. But to have the ability to construct a story very carefully, with 10 episodes sort of mini arcs that are building toward this greater story, I recommend everybody just try to watch it holistically as like a 40 episode movement. And each movement has, 10 episode mini arcs that'll build and grow and create new story threads. But, there's going to be some things that are wrapped up very cleanly at the end of these 20. There's going to be some things that are going to be like, that's what the next 20 episodes are about. Don't worry. And I promise you that some of those things, like if we had tried to wrap them up in just the first 20, they would have been deeply unsatisfying. Mm-hmm. The way we're doing it by taking advantage of all of this story, I think you're gonna be like, wow, I actually really love this character now. I love this arc. I love this. Like, you're gonna see that it needed the room to breathe and blossom. And you won't be disappointed by it. That's what I'll say. That as far as specifically spoileristic things, I think it's Star Trek Mission Chicago. We did reveal that my next episode that I'm writing is a love letter to TOS. And that there is, you will learn more about Ensign Garovic, the one red shirt, who didn't die on TOS. What became of him? Did he remain sort of like a coward, and I think you'll see that even the least of us are capable of great things. And, sometimes even those, who may be unexpected, how do I say this? Sometimes those who may be the least expected are capable of truly embracing what Starfleet means at its truest sense. And sometimes the spirit is more important than the letter of the law. I'll say that.
That is so very Tolkien-esque of you.
Yes.
Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a delight to talk to you and meet you for the first time. And I know that you are very active on social media. So for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about Aaron and what he's doing and to keep up with all of his Prodigy news, Aaron, how can our fans and listeners find you on social media?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Good Aaron. That's GOODAARON. And I did that so you wouldn't have to try to spell my last name, which has way too many consonants in it. Just at Good Aaron. And you can find me there. I try to tweet about Star Trek and screenwriting, and I probably tweet about Star Trek more than anything because that's what I do every day, and it's fun. I say the Star Trek Twitter community is and social media community is really, really quite fun. So check me out.
All right, folks. So make sure that you tag him with all those wonderful interpretations of Murph that you're sending out there in the Twitter universe or on social media, because we all know that our universe can use a lot more Murph nowadays. So we've reached the end of our show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here on Mission Log Prodigy. If you've enjoyed our show, please make sure that you hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to our Mission Log Prodigy playlist here on the Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel, or find us again on your podcast catcher of choice, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment, production and technical direction by Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is missionlogpodcast.com. And if you would like to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be with me, to be with Aaron. Ashley V. Robinson will be back after she's done with her assignment in the Delta Quadrant. That's classified again. And to our young cadets out there who usually send in their segments so that they can be heard and express their opinions and hear their voice on our show, thank you for being so patient in this interim, in this long break, because we just need you to hang in there for a little bit longer, because as Aaron said, it's going to be worth it, and we all know it. So thank you for listening.
Live long and prosper.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.